The learning outline for Lesson 2 is as follows. First, we'll start off with some vocabulary. Next, we'll take a closer look at verbs than we did in Lesson 1, as well as we'll go deeper on subjects. And we will look at conjugating verbs in the Spanish present tense. And then we'll create clauses in Spanish. And a quiz, followed up by some comprehension, and that should just about do it. Here's the vocabulary for today. Take a look at some of these verbs on the left, as well as the word la playa, which means the beach. These are some of the common verbs that we will use in this lesson, and probably you'll see these in future lessons because they are fairly common. And then on the right, there are some phrases that you can take a look at as well. And again, I've tried to connect the subject and conjugated verb for you in yellow. So in yellow, you'll see yo como, and then you'll see the translation of that, I eat, right below that. Hablas tú, and it means do you speak. Nosotros vamos, which means we go. So that's the connection you're supposed to make there. Again, this vocabulary, you're not supposed to memorize it right now, but just get very familiar with some of these words so that as you see them throughout the lesson, you'll be able to get a sense and a feel for what is being discussed. Let's talk a little bit about what a verb is. In Lesson 1, we we touched on a few topics just at the very surface level. Lesson 1 was not meant to be an in-depth review or an in-depth look at some of these parts of speech. It was really meant to just be a preview and to kind of preface where we were going. So yes, we touched on subjects and verbs and the clause formula and all those different things. But really, it's Lesson 2 where we dive down and we go deeper on some of those topics. So the first topic is a verb. Let's talk about what a verb is. This table will help us define and help you get a clear definition of what a verb is. It's fairly straightforward. Words like run, eat, speak, play, jump, talk, those are all verbs. They're words that are action words. Most verbs are easily visualized, so you can kind of picture somebody in your mind running or eating or speaking. And verbs are often paired with subjects. So instead of just like run, eat, speak, you could pair that with a subject. I run, you eat, she speaks, etc. And then verbs can manifest themselves in two different ways. The first way is the infinitive, meaning it's that pure mother verb unconjugated form. To run, to eat, to speak. And the second way verbs appear are their conjugated form. So you pair them with a subject. We run, we is the subject. She eats, she is the subject. You guys speak, you guys is the subject. So these are really the two ways that we see verbs written in English and Spanish. A little more on mother verbs. They are verbs in the purest unconjugated form. In Spanish, you'll see examples such as these three here. Comer, cantar, conducir. And we'll get into this a little bit more later, but notice that these three verbs have very similar endings, meaning they all end in er, ar, or ir. And that's the sign of an unconjugated verb. Next is verb infinitives are not paired with subjects yet. So we don't want to say something like nosotros cantar, because cantar is the infinitive, and you can't pair a subject like nosotros with the verb infinitive. Now, if you changed cantar to cantamos, you certainly could say nosotros cantamos. That's perfectly fine, but that's a conjugated verb with its subject. In this case, we don't want to pair the verb infinitive, or the mother verb, the unconjugated verb, with a subject. And then oftentimes, mother verbs are preceded by the word to. So to eat, to sing, to drive. And an example in like a real sentence is, we want to sing, or I have to sing. And as a recap for the clause formula, just remember this from lesson 1. The subject plus a conjugated verb equals a clause. And here's a little table with 2 examples to show you what I mean. The part here in blue is where we're actually conjugating the verb from its infinitive form to its conjugated form. So you'll notice on this first example, you plus the unconjugated verb to eat, which conjugates to eat, equals you eat. She plus to eat becomes she eats. So those are 2 very simple examples of conjugating using a subject and an unconjugated verb to getting to the clause, the you eat and the she eats. And again, here's the subject chart. Remember, I like to take out the word pronoun because it seems to confuse a lot of people. So I just call this the subject chart, but technically it is the subject pronoun chart. These are the 8 subjects in the English language, and there are 10 corresponding subjects in Spanish. Those on the left are singular, those on the right are plural, and then there's another layer that we won't talk much about, but it's first person on the top, second person, and then third person. And remember, each time you want to create a clause or a sentence, you must choose one of the subjects from this table and combine it with a verb. And then the subject you choose from this chart will determine how the verb is conjugated. And this goes back to my point from lesson 1, when I mentioned that people who are learning to speak English have an easier time conjugating our verbs because very little changes. Like if the verb is to play and your subject is I, it's pretty easy. It becomes I play, you play, we play, they play. So that's pretty easy to conjugate. But in Spanish, it's not quite so easy. So the subject that we choose here will determine how we conjugate the verb in Spanish. And we'll get into this in just a minute or 2. But I want you to kind of know that the subject that we choose, or the subject you choose for your sentence, directly determines how you conjugate the verb. So to keep things simple, this is really all I want you to remember right now, just these subjects here. And this will become, second nature. This chart is going to be ingrained in your mind. You'll have this down. You don't need to memorize this. It'll come with time. Here's the Spanish subject chart with the Spanish subjects. There are 10 subjects in Spanish. Yo, tú, él, ella, usted, nosotros, vosotros, ellos, ellas, ustedes. These are the subjects we're going to be using as we start to conjugate verbs and create clauses in Spanish. So let's speak Spanish. Let's dive deeper into verb infinitives. I'm presenting you here with 3 Spanish verb infinitives, and I want to ask, are there any similarities between these 3 verb infinitives? Anything you notice that's similar between the 3? Well, the answer is in their endings. Of course, they all end in R, but if you look closer, you'll notice that they end in AR, ER, and IR. I want to take a minute to explain that every verb infinitive will end in AR, ER, or IR. And that's the first important thing you need to know about infinitives. So every Spanish verb infinitive ends in AR, ER, or IR. The second thing you need to know about these is that ending determines how you will conjugate the verb in Spanish. So when you're ready to conjugate, look to that ending, and that will direct you. And you'll know more. I'll explain more about this. I'll explain this in greater detail in just a moment. But you just need to know those two important things at this point.